Caitlin Clark just ended Stephanie White's career with the Indiana Fever, and the Seattle Storm game is exactly where it happened. Clark is averaging 20-plus points, almost double-digit assists, near triple-doubles, and she's doing it while being benched during winning stretches by a coach who clearly doesn't trust what she's built. Something broke during that game. Not a play, not a possession, but the actual relationship between Clark and White snapped on camera, right there on the sideline. You could see it. Clark pulled away, and that body language told you everything the post-game quotes wouldn't. The question now isn't whether White survives this season, it's whether she even finishes it. If you want the Fever to fire Stephanie White, drop a comment below on why, because the front office needs to hear exactly how loud this fan base is.
You're witnessing Caitlin Clark argue with Stephanie White. Caitlin trying to communicate with the team. Look, now Stephanie White's talking to Caitlin, and Caitlin Clark just said like this, "Stephanie, what are you talking?" She's like, Caitlin just, and then look at Stephanie White and her having a dispute. Another dispute on camera. Going to Stephanie White, trying to hear her out. And Caitlin's trying to explain to Stephanie White. Stephanie White with a rebuttal. I'm talking about right here. Right here. Stephanie White, how about you go right there? How about you go right there, please?
There's a moment in the Seattle Storm game where you just stop watching the ball. Clark had been going, genuinely going, scoring, distributing, reading the defense in real time the way only she does at this level, and the Fever were moving with her. Then a stoppage comes, White calls the team over, and what you see next on that sideline tells you more about this situation than any stat line could. Clark ripped her hand away. White had grabbed her arm and Clark pulled back hard and fast, not in a panic, just done. There were reports of Clark telling someone to get their hands off her, and you could see it in how she carried herself after that. Head slightly turned, body angled away, not engaging. That's not a player who's frustrated about a play call. That's a player who checked out of the relationship entirely, and the camera caught every second of it. Watch how it works when a coach and a star player actually trust each other. You see the player lean in during a timeout, physically close, making eye contact, nodding at the adjustment even if they don't fully agree with it because the baseline trust is there. Phil Jackson can get in Michael Jordan's face and say, "Come here, let me talk to you," without it becoming a scene, because that relationship has a foundation. What we saw with Clark and White had none of that. Clark shook her head, visibly disgusted, and stood apart from the huddle in a way that wasn't accidental.
I'm tired of the back and forth. Every time Caitlin says A, you say B. How about you? Yeah, Caitlin, let's try A. For God's sake, I've never seen you agree with Caitlin Clark on camera. My girl? Holy, like, god damn, Steph. Like, give us something positive to say at some point. And it's hard for your haters to defend you. I mean, it's hard for your defenders to defend you. God damn.
This didn't come out of nowhere in that one game. Go back to the early days of this season and the surface looked okay, but the cracks were already there if you watched closely enough. The communication felt off. The on-court adjustments weren't landing. Clark was doing her thing and the coaching staff was sort of hovering around it rather than building on it. And after Clark dropped 17 points in the fourth quarter against Washington a few nights ago, hitting 5 threes and single-handedly dragging the Fever back into that game, White stood at the podium and said, "I thought our whole group showed resilience." That was it. No mention of Clark by name. No acknowledgement of what just happened. One commentator put it plainly. It seems to pain White to publicly agree with Clark on camera, and watching that press conference, it's hard to argue with that read. Clark didn't have a bad game before that sideline moment. She wasn't struggling, wasn't forcing things, wasn't the reason the Fever were in trouble. White was still pulling her during winning stretches, still running a system around her instead of through her, and Clark had been absorbing that for weeks. That pull-away wasn't a reaction to a bad timeout. It was Clark stopping pretending that any of this was fine.
Man, save Caitlin Clark, bro. Yo, at some point, man, we're gonna have to start being like we gotta be like, come on. Even Slurp FC, y'all gotta at some point, y'all gotta see this. Like, there's no way Caitlin Clark is losing her shit, and everyone's acting like this is normal. Like this is years on years of evidence. You know what? It is what it is, bro.
Look at the actual numbers from the Storm game, and the pattern becomes impossible to defend. Clark comes out 4 minutes into the first quarter, 7 points already on the board, 3 assists already distributed, and the Fever up 13. Up 13. White pulls her anyway because the rotation schedule said so, and the offense immediately goes flat. That's not a coaching adjustment. That's a coach following a plan that stops working. The second, Clark sits down. Without Aaliyah Boston nursing that leg injury, Clark is genuinely the only player on that roster who can facilitate the offense. So when Clark goes to the bench, the Fever aren't just missing a scorer. They're running sets that require a facilitator who isn't there, and the field goal percentage in those stretches shows it. The Fever got outscored in both the second and fourth quarters against Seattle, a weak Seattle roster, in the exact windows where Clark was resting.
Stephanie White, Caitlin Clark. Getting in disagreements on the sidelines. Back and forth, heated back and forth, yelling at each other. Stephanie White pointing, like the annoying person that she is. Just nagging. Just nagging. We all remember this from the other day. Caitlin Clark and Brianne January heated on the bench again.
White's coaching brain runs a system-first offense where the play is the play, and everyone executes their role. And that approach isn't wrong by itself. It actually works for younger players like Michaela Timpson and Raven Johnson, who need that structure to stay functional. But Clark doesn't run that kind of game. Clark reads the defense in real time, makes decisions that no playbook scripted, and generates offense through feel and instinct, and those two philosophies genuinely can't coexist without someone choosing which one the team is actually built for. The off-ball stuff makes it worse. Clark pushes the pace, demands her teammates run, wants to play fast and put pressure on defenses before they can set up, and the coaching staff keeps signaling her to slow it down. They're not tweaking a play when they do that. They're cutting off the exact rhythm that makes her impossible to guard, and you can see Clark's frustration in real time when it happens.
There's too much of this grabbing, yanking, pulling, pushing, screaming, yelling, pointing going on in the Indiana Fever, and it's time, Caitlin Clark, it's time she looks for her nearest exit route and gets the heck out of Dodge. The Indiana Fever, they might be knowing, deep down in their heart of hearts, they might know that Caitlin Clark's walking on their asses the first opportunity she gets. That's why they're marketing everybody else.
Then there's the marketing situation, which goes beyond White entirely. For the NBC broadcast against Seattle, the Fever promoted Raven Johnson in their game day materials. Raven Johnson, who averages 1 point per game. Not Clark, who was setting records. That's the front office telling you exactly how much they understand what they have, and the attendance numbers are already responding. The season opener sold out at 17,274. The second game drew 15,673. And the Storm game pulled only 14,505, with cheap resale tickets sitting everywhere. White's rotations aren't tactical decisions built around winning. They're habitual, pre-planned, and completely disconnected from what's actually happening on the floor, and the Fever keep bleeding momentum in the exact moments where they should be putting teams away.
Anybody remembers that? I remember this, Bane. I remember this. I remember this. Caitlin Clark doing what Caitlin Clark does, hyping up the crowd, getting the crowd rowdy. And here comes the coach. Here comes the coach, grabbing her. Why? What are we doing here? You can't show too much emotion, Caitlin. Everybody's gonna get mad at you, Caitlin. You can't show too much emotion. You're showing up everybody else. What are we doing here? You don't take the fire out of the player. You damn sure don't yank him up like you're about to push him into a locker.
Colin Cowherd doesn't cover WNBA games every week. He picks his spots, and when he dedicated a full segment to whether Stephanie White should resign, that wasn't a slow news day decision. That was Cowherd reading the room and recognizing that the Clark-White situation had crossed into something a national audience would actually care about, and he was right.
So Caitlin Clark, third season in the WNBA, has already set the record. She had another game in which she had at least 20 points and 10 assists. And I have been saying when she broke into the league, people said her comp is Steph Curry. Now, I think stylistically, the way she plays her game has got some Steph Curry. I think, though, in terms of an iconic player, she's more Michael Jordan. So Jordan walked into the NBA. He was a rookie sensation. Year 2, he got hurt. Year 3, he was like the best player in the league.
His framing wasn't soft about it either. Cowherd said White is not her Phil Jackson, compared White's fit with Clark to Doc Rivers, and flat out argued that Clark has Jordan-esque potential that needs both the right coach and the right running mate to actually get there. When Cowherd says something like that on his platform, it doesn't stay in the sports talk bubble. It moves. Front offices hear it, agents hear it, free agents considering Indiana absolutely hear it, and suddenly, the Fever's internal coaching problem becomes a public organizational crisis they have to address out loud. NBC reporters started weighing in too, and that part matters more than it sounds because NBC holds the broadcast deal with the WNBA. When the league's own media partners start covering the Clark-White friction as a real problem worth scrutinizing, that's not outside criticism the league can wave off. That's the people writing the checks saying something's wrong.
But there are stages to greatness, and I've always felt her game is Steph. I think she has a chance to be Jordan-esque, which is multiple championships if she can get the right coach and the right running mate. And I think she has that player.
And the fans already knew. Fever fans aren't casual. They're not people who show up once because Clark's famous and then move on. They've been waiting for this franchise to be nationally relevant, and Clark handed them that. So every benching mid-run and every deflected press conference answer lands like a personal insult to them. When White stood at the podium after Clark scored 17 points in the fourth quarter against Washington, hitting 5 threes to drag the Fever back into the game, and White's response to a direct question about Clark was just, "I thought our whole group showed resilience." The fan base didn't forget that. The attendance numbers are already telling the story the front office doesn't want to read. The season opener sold out at 17,274 people. The second game drew 15,673. The Storm game pulled 14,505, with resale tickets sitting cheap and unsold. That's nearly 3,000 empty seats in 3 games, and that trajectory doesn't reverse itself while the same problems stay in place. Chicago didn't win 6 championships by running a system that worked around Michael Jordan. Los Angeles didn't build 2 dynasties by asking Kobe Bryant to fit into someone else's structure. Those franchises identified what their best player did better than anyone alive, and then built everything else to feed that. Indiana is doing the opposite, and the country has noticed. Cowherd's segment didn't create the pressure on the Fever's front office. It just made it impossible to pretend the pressure wasn't there. Look at what the Fever actually have when everyone's healthy, because this roster is not a rebuilding project. Clark running the offense, Aaliyah Boston as the interior anchor who turns Clark's passes into layups and free throws, Kelsey Mitchell as a second scorer who gets easier looks because defenses are already tilted toward Clark, Lexi Hull, and Sophie Cunningham on the wings, providing real toughness and shooting. Cunningham alone dropped 17 points off the bench in 1 game this season, so the pieces are genuinely there. This team can compete for a title. The problem isn't talent. It's that talent sitting under the wrong coaching structure just stays talent forever, and the Fever have been that team for too long. What Indiana needs in a coach isn't a famous name. It's a specific way of thinking about the game. Someone who watches Clark run a pick and roll and immediately asks, "How do I draw up that action 12 times tonight?" rather than, "How do I keep her inside the scheme?" That's a completely different coaching brain, and it's the one the Fever don't currently have. Clark performs better when she's quarterbacking the offense, telling teammates where to go, pushing pace, drawing 3 defenders because nobody knows if she'll shoot, pass, or attack. White's system cuts all of that off at the source. Clark's own words are telling here. She's admitted she plays best when she's just letting it fly, and she's described feeling hesitant, which should alarm everyone in that front office because a hesitant Caitlin Clark is still putting up historic numbers. One analyst pointed out that if she averages around 23, 24 points and 9 assists on the season, she wins MVP, and she's approaching that while being managed conservatively. If a coach actually runs the offense through her and stops pulling her mid-run, that statistical ceiling goes somewhere nobody in the WNBA has been in a long time. Clark is 24 years old. These aren't just regular season games. These are the years where habits get built, where confidence either compounds or gets chipped away, and right now she's spending those years fighting a system instead of growing inside one. Every game where she's hesitating because she's been conditioned to second-guess herself is a game where she's not developing the instincts of a champion, and you don't get those seasons back. The Fever's front office has a real decision in front of them, and it goes beyond whether White keeps her job. It's about whether Indiana wants to be a franchise that wins or a franchise that happens to have a famous player. Get a coach who actually builds around Clark, keep Boston healthy, let Mitchell and Lexi Hull run their natural games, and the 2026 Fever become a team that scares people in May and June, which is exactly when it needs to matter. Clark will grand marshal the Indianapolis 500 this year, the whole state of Indiana behind her, and she's still out there fighting a coaching staff that reportedly hates hearing her say she plays best when she's letting it fly. That's where this franchise actually sits right now, one of the most marketable players in women's sports history, doing things no player at this stage normally does, and the person drawing up the plays resents how she plays them. If you want the Fever to fire Stephanie White, drop a comment below, because the front office needs to hear exactly how loud this fan base is. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on all notifications so you don't miss out on all things basketball. Click the video on the screen, and we will see you in the next one.